The dust cloud rose behind her broken wagon like a signal fire to heaven, and Sarah Caldwell knew she had maybe 2 hours before the Arizona sun turned her into a memory. She stood beside the crippled wagon on the road between Tucson and Prescott, staring at the shattered wheel that had given up its fight against the rocky terrain. The wooden spokes had cracked clean through, leaving the axle grinding against the dusty earth. Her horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, waited patiently in her harness, occasionally stamping a hoof against the hard ground. Sarah pulled her bonnet lower over her face, squinting against the glare of the late afternoon sun. It was September of 1882, and the heat still blazed fierce enough to make a person question every life choice that had led them to this God-forsaken stretch of desert. She had been traveling alone from Tucson to Prescott to meet her aunt, who had promised her work in a seamstress shop. At 22 years old, Sarah had spent the last 3 years caring for her ailing mother in St. Louis. And after her mother's passing 6 months ago, she had nothing left there but memories and an empty boarding house room she could no longer afford. Her aunt's letter had arrived like Providence, offering a fresh start in the Arizona territory. Sarah had sold what little she owned, bought passage on a train west, and purchased the horse and wagon in Tucson with the last of her savings. Now those savings seemed poorly spent. She circled the wagon again, as if looking at the broken wheel from a different angle might somehow fix it. The water barrel strapped to the side was half full, enough for another day if she rationed carefully. Her trunk of belongings sat secured in the wagon bed, along with a few supplies she had purchased for the journey. She had a pistol tucked under the wagon seat, though she had never fired it at anything more threatening than a tin can. Her father had insisted she learn before he died, back when she was 17, but that felt like a lifetime ago. The road stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of pale earth cutting through scrub brush and scattered cacti. She had not seen another traveler in hours. The stagecoach that ran this route would not pass through until tomorrow morning, and she could not survive a night out here without shelter or a fire to keep the cold and the coyotes at bay. Sarah was considering her options, none of them good, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the south. She turned, shading her eyes, and saw a lone rider coming toward her at an easy canter. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by caution. A woman alone on a deserted road could not afford to trust every stranger who happened along. As the rider drew closer, she could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat pulled low over his face, a dark shirt, and worn denim pants tucked into scuffed leather boots. A rifle rested in a saddle holster, and she could see the glint of a gun belt around his waist. His horse was a sturdy buckskin gelding that looked like it could run all day without complaint. The rider slowed as he approached, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. He stopped about 10 feet away and pushed his hat back, revealing a sun-bronzed face with strong features and clear blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice a deep drawl that carried easily in the stillness. "Looks like you have got some trouble there." Sarah kept her hands visible and her posture straight, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "The wheel broke about an hour ago. I have been trying to figure out what to do about it." The cowboy swung down from his horse with an easy grace, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "Mind if I take a look?" "I would be grateful," Sarah admitted. He walked over to the broken wheel, crouching down to examine it closely. He ran his hands over the splintered spokes, testing the hub and the rim. Sarah watched him work, noting the capable way he handled himself, the quiet competence in his movements. His hands were strong and weathered, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living. "This is pretty well shot," he said after a moment, glancing up at her. "But I can fix it well enough to get you where you are headed. You have a spare spoke in there." "I do not know," Sarah confessed. This wagon came with some supplies, but I am not entirely sure what all is included. The cowboy straightened and moved to the back of the wagon, digging through the toolbox strapped beneath the bed. "You are in luck," he said, pulling out a spare spoke and some tools. "This will do the job. It is not going to be pretty, but it will hold until you can get to a proper wheelwright." "Thank you," Sarah said, meaning it. "I was starting to worry I would be spending the night out here." "That would not be advisable," he agreed, getting to work. He loosened the wheel from the axle with practiced efficiency, then began the careful process of removing the broken spokes and fitting the new one into place. "Where are you headed, Prescott? I have an aunt there. Long way to travel alone." I did not have much choice in the matter. He glanced at her, something like understanding in those blue eyes. "Fair enough. I am headed that direction myself, got work on a ranch about 20 miles outside town." Sarah relaxed slightly. If he was employed and had a destination, he was less likely to be the type of drifter who caused trouble. "What kind of work?" "Cattle, mostly. Breaking horses when they need it, whatever else needs doing." He hammered the spoke into place with firm, measured strikes. "Been working ranches since I was 14. It is honest work, if hard. I am sure it is." They fell into silence while he worked. Sarah found herself studying him more closely, noting the careful way he handled the repair, the concentration on his face. There was something steady about him, something that made her feel safer than she had since leaving Tucson. After about 30 minutes, he had the wheel repaired and back on the axle. He tested it, spinning it slowly to make sure it held firm, then stood and brushed the dust from his pants. "That should get you to Prescott," he said. "Just take it slow over rough ground and it ought to hold." "I cannot thank you enough," Sarah said. "Please let me pay you something for your trouble." He shook his head. "No need, just glad I came along when I did." "At least tell me your name so I know who to thank properly." He smiled for the first time, a slow grin that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Name is Caleb Thornton." "Sarah Caldwell," she replied, extending her hand. He took it, his grip warm and firm. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Caldwell. It is Miss and likewise Mr. Thornton. Just Caleb is fine." He released her hand and walked back to his horse, gathering up the reins. Sarah felt a strange reluctance to see him go, this quiet stranger who had appeared exactly when she needed help. "Would you like some water before you ride on?" she offered. "It is the least I can do." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "That would be kind of you." Sarah fetched the tin cup from her wagon and filled it from the water barrel. He drank gratefully, then handed the cup back. "You should get moving," he said. "You have maybe 3 hours of good daylight left. There is a way station about 15 miles up the road where you can stop for the night. Name is Cooper Station. Tell them Caleb sent you and they will treat you fair." "I will, thank you again." He mounted his horse, settling into the saddle. He tipped his hat to her, then turned his horse north up the road. Sarah watched him ride away, dust rising beneath his horse's hooves until he disappeared around a bend in the road. She stood there for a long moment, feeling oddly bereft. Then she shook herself, climbed up onto the wagon seat and gathered the reins. Daisy responded to her gentle command and the wagon lurched forward. The repaired wheel held firm, and Sarah allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The miles passed slowly. The sun descended toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Sarah kept her eyes on the road and her hands steady on the reins, but her mind kept drifting back to the cowboy who had stopped to help her. Caleb Thornton. There had been something about him, something she could not quite name. A quiet strength, maybe. A steadiness that made her feel like the world was not quite as uncertain as it seemed. Cooper Station appeared just as the sun was setting, a low adobe building with a corral and a small stable. Sarah pulled her wagon into the yard, and an older man with a graying beard came out to greet her. "Help you, miss. I am looking for a place to stay the night. Caleb Thornton said you might have room." The man's weathered face broke into a smile. "Any friend of Caleb's is welcome here." "Name is Pete Cooper. Go ahead and stable your horse, and I will have my wife get a room ready for you." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude. She unhitched Daisy and led her into the stable, making sure the mare had water and feed before heading into the station house. Mrs. Cooper, a round woman with kind eyes, showed her to a small but clean room and promised supper within the hour. Over a meal of beef stew and cornbread, Sarah learned that Caleb was well known along this stretch of road, a man who could be counted on to help a neighbor in need. Pete Cooper spoke of him with genuine affection, saying he had helped them rebuild their corral after a flash flood 2 years back and had never asked for a penny in return. "Good man, that Caleb," Pete said. "He has had his share of hard times, but it never made him bitter. That is a rare thing." Sarah wondered what hard times Pete meant, but did not feel right asking. Instead, she thanked the Coopers for their hospitality, paid them a fair price for the room and meal, and retired for the night. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the desert night through the open window. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. The stars blazed overhead, more stars than she had ever seen in St. Louis. She thought about Caleb Thornton, wondered where he was camped for the night, wondered if she would ever see him again. The thought left her feeling strangely hollow. Sarah woke at dawn and was on the road within an hour, eager to reach Prescott. The repaired wheel held throughout the morning, and by early afternoon she could see the town rising from the landscape ahead of her. Prescott sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, a bustling community that served as the territorial capital. The streets were busy with wagons and riders, and buildings lined the main road, everything from saloons to general stores to a large courthouse at the center of town. Sarah found her aunt's address without much trouble. Aunt Margaret lived in a neat house on a quiet street, with a shop front that advertised fine dressmaking and alterations in painted letters on the window. Sarah tied up her wagon and knocked on the door, her heart beating fast with anticipation and nervousness. The woman who answered was in her early 50s, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, and Sarah's mother's same gray eyes. She took one look at Sarah and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Sarah, dear girl, you made it. I was starting to worry. I had some trouble on the road, but I am here now." Aunt Margaret pulled her inside, fussing over her like a mother hen. The house was small but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms upstairs and the shop taking up the front room downstairs. Margaret's apprentice, a young woman named Lucy, was working on a dress at a table near the window. She looked up and smiled shyly at Sarah. Over tea and sandwiches, Sarah told her aunt about her journey, including the broken wheel and the cowboy who had stopped to help. Margaret listened with interest, her eyes sharpening when Sarah mentioned Caleb's name. "Caleb Thornton, I know of him. He works for the Double R Ranch about 20 miles west of here. Good reputation, that one, quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but reliable. Pete Cooper spoke well of him too. Pete Cooper is a good judge of character." Margaret refilled Sarah's teacup. "You were lucky he came along when he did." Sarah nodded, remembering the way Caleb had looked crouched beside her wagon wheel, his hands sure and steady. "I was." The days that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Sarah quickly adapted to life in Prescott and to working in her aunt's shop. She had always been good with a needle, and Margaret was an excellent teacher, showing her the finer points of dressmaking and how to handle difficult customers with grace. Lucy became a friend, and together the 3 women created a pleasant working environment. But Sarah found her thoughts drifting back to Caleb Thornton more often than she cared to admit. She wondered if he had made it safely to the Double R Ranch, wondered what he was doing, wondered if he ever thought about the stranded woman he had helped on the road. 3 weeks after her arrival in Prescott, Sarah was in the shop working on a wedding dress when the bell over the door chimed. She looked up and felt her heart skip in her chest. Caleb Thornton stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the feminine space of the dress shop. His eyes found hers immediately, and something like relief crossed his face. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "I was hoping I might find you here." Sarah set down her needle, aware that her hands were suddenly unsteady. "Mr. Thornton, what a surprise." I was in town picking up supplies for the ranch, he explained. Thought I would stop by and see how you were getting along, make sure that wheel held up. It did. I got here without any further trouble thanks to you. She gestured to the chairs near the front window. Would you like to sit down? Caleb glanced around the shop, clearly uncertain. Margaret, who had been watching the exchange with interest from the back room, emerged with a knowing smile. Why do you not take a break, Sarah? She suggested. I am sure Mr. Thornton would appreciate some company and Lucy and I can manage here for a while. Sarah shot her aunt a grateful look and grabbed her shawl. There is a nice tea shop down the street, she told Caleb, if you have time. I have time, he said. They walked down the street together, an awkward silence stretching between them. Sarah could feel the eyes of passers-by on them, curious and speculating. A young woman and a cowboy walking together was bound to cause gossip in a town like Prescott. The tea shop was run by a widow named Mrs. Henderson, who served excellent coffee and pastries. They found a table near the back, and Caleb ordered coffee while Sarah had tea. The silence continued until their drinks arrived, and then they both spoke at once. I have been wondering, they stopped, and Caleb gestured for her to continue. I have been wondering if you made it to the ranch safely, Sarah said. I never properly thanked you for what you did. You thanked me just fine, Caleb replied. And yes, I made it to the ranch. Been working hard these past few weeks. We have been moving cattle to winter pastures. That sounds like difficult work. It keeps me busy. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, and Sarah noticed again how capable those hands looked. Truth is, I have been thinking about you. Wondering if you settled in all right, if your aunt was good to you. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. You have been thinking about me? Caleb met her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. I have. That probably sounds forward, and I apologize if it is. But I have not been able to get you out of my mind since that day on the road. I have been thinking about you too, Sarah admitted softly. The confession hung between them, heavy with possibility. Caleb leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. Miss Caldwell, I know we have only met the once, and I know I am just a cowboy without much to offer, but I would like to call on you if you would allow it. Get to know you proper. Sarah's heart was beating so fast she thought he must surely hear it. I would like that very much. And please call me Sarah. His face broke into that slow smile she remembered. Then you should call me Caleb. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing more easily now that the initial awkwardness had passed. Caleb told her about growing up in Texas, how his parents had died of fever when he was 12, leaving him and his older brother to fend for themselves. His brother had been killed in a bar fight when Caleb was 19, a senseless death that had left him alone in the world. He had drifted for a few years after that, working ranches from Texas to Montana, until he had landed in Arizona and found steady work at the Double R. Sarah shared her own story, the years of caring for her mother, the loneliness after her death, the courage it had taken to board a train heading west with no real certainty of what waited for her. You are braver than you think, Caleb said when she finished. Coming out here alone, starting over. That takes grit. I did not feel brave, Sarah confessed. I felt terrified. Sometimes that is the same thing. When they finally left the tea shop, the sun was lowering in the sky. Caleb walked her back to the dress shop and they stood outside for a long moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. When can I see you again? Caleb asked. Sunday is my day off. Aunt Margaret and I usually attend church in the morning, but I am free in the afternoon. Could I take you for a drive? There is a pretty spot by the creek about 5 miles outside of town. I think you would like it. I would enjoy that. Caleb smiled, and Sarah thought she had never seen anything quite so wonderful as the joy in his eyes. He tipped his hat to her, then mounted his horse and rode off down the street. Sarah watched him go, feeling like she was floating several inches above the ground. Margaret was waiting inside with an expectant look. Well. He asked to call on me, Sarah said, unable to keep the smile from her face. And you said yes, I hope. I said yes. Margaret hugged her, laughing. I had a feeling about that young man the moment you mentioned him. There is something special there, Sarah, I can feel it. The days leading up to Sunday seemed to stretch forever. Sarah threw herself into her work, but her mind kept wandering to Caleb, replaying their conversation at the tea shop, imagining what Sunday afternoon would bring. She found herself checking her reflection more often than usual, fussing with her hair, wondering if he found her pretty. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah attended church with Margaret, barely hearing the sermon, her thoughts fixed on the afternoon ahead. After lunch, she changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and waited on the porch. Caleb arrived right on time, driving a small buggy borrowed from the ranch. He had cleaned up, shaved, and was wearing a dark coat over a clean white shirt. He looked so handsome that Sarah felt her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said as he helped her into the buggy. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." They drove out of town, following a dusty road that wound through rolling hills. Caleb kept up an easy conversation, pointing out landmarks, telling her stories about the area. Sarah felt completely at ease with him, a feeling so natural and right that it almost scared her. The creek he had mentioned was indeed beautiful, a ribbon of clear water running through a grove of cottonwood trees. The leaves were starting to turn, splashes of gold among the green. Caleb spread a blanket under one of the trees and they sat together, watching the water flow past. "This is peaceful," Sarah said. "Thank you for bringing me here." "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Caleb admitted. "It helps clear my head." "What do you think about?" He was quiet for a moment. "The future, mostly, what I want out of life." "I have spent a lot of years just drifting, taking whatever work came along, never really settling anywhere. But lately I have been feeling like maybe it is time to put down roots, find something permanent." Sarah's heart beat faster. What changed? Caleb turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Meeting you, I know that sounds crazy, we barely know each other, but when I saw you standing by that broken wagon, something just clicked into place. Like I had been looking for something without knowing what it was, and suddenly there you were." "I felt it too," Sarah whispered. "I have been feeling it ever since." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers threading through hers. "Sarah, I do not have much to offer. A cowboy's wages are not much and the work is hard, but I am honest and I work hard and I would do everything in my power to make you happy. I know it is too soon to talk about forever, but I need you to know that is what I am thinking about, forever with you." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. "Caleb, I left everything behind to come here. I sold everything I owned for a chance at a new life, and now I feel like I understand why. Like I was supposed to end up on that road with a broken wagon wheel so you could find me. Do you believe in fate? I am starting to." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Sarah did not want to. She closed the distance between them, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft and sweet and filled with promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and laughing and stealing kisses like two young people falling headlong in love. Caleb told her about his dreams of maybe owning his own small ranch someday, a few acres where he could raise horses. Sarah talked about her love of sewing, how she found satisfaction in creating something beautiful with her hands. They discovered shared tastes in books and music, argued playfully about whether Texas or Missouri had better summers, and found 100 small compatibilities that made them both believe this was real. As the sun began to set, Caleb drove Sarah back to town. They held hands the entire way, neither wanting to break the connection. Outside her aunt's house, Caleb helped her down from the buggy and pulled her close. "Can I see you again next Sunday?" he asked. "Yes, and maybe during the week too if you come to town." "I will make sure I come to town," he promised. He kissed her again, a long, lingering kiss that left Sarah dizzy and breathless. Then he climbed back into the buggy and drove away, turning to wave at her until he disappeared around a corner. Margaret was waiting with hot tea and a knowing smile. "You are glowing, dear. I think I am falling in love with him, Aunt Margaret." "I think you already have, sweetheart." The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Sarah's life. Caleb came to town every Sunday without fail, and often during the week as well, stopping by the shop on whatever errands he could manufacture as excuses. They went on long walks, had picnics by the creek, attended town dances where Caleb proved to be a surprisingly good dancer despite his protests to the contrary. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and quirks and dreams. Sarah met some of Caleb's friends from the Double R Ranch, good men who clearly respected him. Caleb charmed Aunt Margaret completely, helping her fix a leaky roof and refusing payment, instead accepting only an invitation to Sunday dinner. Lucy became their confidante and chaperone, often accompanying them on outings with a cheerful smile and the good sense to give them privacy when they needed it. As autumn deepened into winter, Caleb became more serious. Sarah could sense something building in him, a tension that made her both nervous and excited. On a cold December evening, he came to the house and asked to speak with Margaret privately. They were closeted in the sitting room for nearly 20 minutes, and when they emerged, Margaret was smiling through tears. "He wants to ask you something, dear," she said, squeezing Sarah's hand before disappearing upstairs. Caleb looked nervous as he led Sarah to the sofa. He sat beside her, taking both her hands in his. "Sarah, I am not good with fancy words," he began, "but I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing by that wagon, looking so brave even though I could see you were scared. These past few months have been the best of my life, and I cannot imagine going back to how things were before I met you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "I talked to the ranch foreman, and he has agreed to give me a piece of land on the edge of the property, 40 acres where I can build a house and start my own herd. It is not much, but it is a start. It is a future." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small garnet set in the center. "Sarah Caldwell, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who loves you more than anything in this world?" "Yes," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and Margaret was cheering from the top of the stairs where she had apparently been eavesdropping. They all laughed and cried together, and Caleb stayed for dinner, holding Sarah's hand under the table like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. They were married in February of 1883, on a bright cold day when the sky was impossibly blue. The ceremony took place in the small church Sarah and Margaret attended, with half the town in attendance. Caleb wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, and Sarah wore a dress she and Margaret had sewn together, white silk with lace at the collar and sleeves. Lucy served as maid of honor, and one of Caleb's friends from the ranch stood up as best man. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Caleb kissed Sarah like she was the most precious thing in the world, and everyone cheered. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and music and dancing that lasted until well after midnight. Sarah danced with her new husband, feeling like her feet barely touched the floor. They spent their wedding night at a hotel in town, shy and nervous and overwhelmingly happy. Caleb was gentle and patient, and Sarah fell asleep in his arms feeling safer and more loved than she had ever felt in her life. The next morning, they loaded Sarah's belongings into a wagon and made the journey to the Double R Ranch. The 40 acres Caleb had been given sat at the base of a low hill, with a creek running through one corner and views of the mountains in the distance. He had been working on their house for months, building it with his own hands whenever he had free time. It was small but solid, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft upstairs that could be finished later. Sarah walked through the empty rooms, imagining how she would arrange their furniture, where she would put her sewing machine, how she would make this house into a home. Caleb watched her nervously, clearly worried she would find it lacking. "It is perfect," she told him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It is absolutely perfect." They worked hard that first year building their life together. Caleb worked for the ranch during the day and on their own land in the evenings and weekends, slowly building up a small herd of cattle and horses. Sarah sewed for women in town, taking commissions and building a reputation for fine work. They were often exhausted by the end of the day, but they were happy, collapsing into bed together and talking about their plans for the future. In the spring, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening after dinner, watching his face cycle through shock, joy, and terror in rapid succession. "A baby," he said, his voice awed. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, suddenly nervous. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "Happy? Sarah, I am terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. I know, I can hardly believe it." He set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "I am going to take such good care of you, both of you, I promise." Caleb was true to his word. He fussed over Sarah constantly, worrying when she worked too hard, bringing her flowers from the meadow, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of long days. Margaret came out to visit often, bringing supplies and advice and maternal reassurance. Lucy visited too, bringing gossip from town and keeping Sarah entertained during the long days when Caleb was working. Their son was born in January of 1884, during a cold snap that froze the creek solid. The birth was hard, and Sarah labored for nearly 20 hours before the baby finally arrived, screaming his displeasure at the world. Caleb held his son with shaking hands, tears running down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Caleb's father. He was a beautiful baby with Caleb's blue eyes and Sarah's nose, and they both fell completely in love with him. Caleb proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle despite his fear of doing something wrong. He would walk Thomas around the house for hours when the baby was fussy, singing cowboy songs in his deep voice until Thomas fell asleep on his shoulder. The years that followed were full and rich. Their horse breeding program began to show success, and other ranchers started coming to Caleb to buy stock. Sarah's sewing business grew as well, and she hired 2 young women from town to help her keep up with orders. They added on to the house, building more rooms upstairs and a proper workshop for Sarah's sewing. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Caroline, who looked so much alike that even Sarah sometimes had trouble telling them apart. The house rang with children's laughter, and Sarah often found herself standing in the doorway, watching her family and marveling at how full her life had become. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and the twins were 4, Sarah and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. Caleb had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling perfectly content. "Do you ever think about that day I found you by the broken wagon?" Caleb asked. "All the time," Sarah admitted. "I was so scared that day, I thought I was going to die out there in the desert." "I almost rode right past you," Caleb said quietly. "I was in a hurry to get to the ranch, did not want to be late for my first day of work, but something made me stop, I still do not know what." "Fate," Sarah said. "It had to be fate." Caleb tightened his arm around her. "I am glad I stopped. I am glad I fixed your wagon wheel and asked your name." Sarah laughed softly. "You did ask my name twice, do you remember? Once when you first introduced yourself and then again later before you left. I thought maybe you had forgotten already." "I did not forget," Caleb said. "I just wanted to hear it again. Sarah Caldwell, it sounded like music." "Sarah Thornton now," she corrected, smiling up at him. "Sarah Thornton," he agreed, kissing her softly. "The love of my life, mother of my children, my partner in everything." "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Settling down, giving up your wandering ways?" Caleb looked at her like she was crazy. "Regret this. Sarah, you and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me. I spent years drifting because I did not have anything to anchor me. You gave me that anchor, you gave me a home." Thomas came running up to the porch then, demanding that his father come play. Caleb scooped him up with one arm, then reached down to help Sarah to her feet. They walked into the yard together, Caleb carrying Thomas while Sarah gathered the twins, and they played until the stars came out and the children's eyes grew heavy. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Caleb lay in bed together, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rumbling in his chest. "Always have, always will." As the years continued to pass, their lives settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew and thrived. Thomas developed his father's gift with horses and spent every free moment in the stables. The twins were inseparable, creating their own language and getting into the kind of mischief that made Sarah laugh even when she was trying to be stern. When Sarah was 35, she gave birth to one last child, a daughter they named Margaret after Sarah's aunt. Aunt Margaret had passed away peacefully the year before, leaving the dress shop to Sarah in her will. Sarah had hired a manager to run it, and the profits provided extra income that allowed them to expand the ranch even further. Baby Margaret was a sweet-tempered child who seemed to bring light wherever she went. Caleb doted on her shamelessly, and Sarah often found them together in the evenings, Caleb reading to Margaret from the battered collection of books they had accumulated over the years. Thomas grew into a fine young man, strong and capable like his father, with a good heart that made Sarah proud. When he was 19, he fell in love with a rancher's daughter named Anna, and the wedding was the social event of the season. Watching Thomas exchange vows with his bride, Sarah reached for Caleb's hand and squeezed it, remembering their own wedding day 18 years earlier. The twins proved to be talented seamstresses, taking over more and more of Sarah's work as they got older. They opened a second dress shop in a neighboring town, and it thrived under their management. They were courted by several young men, but they were in no hurry to settle down, enjoying their independence and their business too much. Young Margaret showed an early talent for drawing and painting, covering every available surface with her artwork. Caleb built her a small studio in the barn, and she spent hours there, lost in her creative world. Through it all, Sarah and Caleb's love for each other only deepened. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, sick children and financial worries, all the challenges that came with building a life together. But they had faced everything side by side, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating together during the good. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Sarah with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Thomas and Anna and took the train west, spending a glorious week exploring the city together. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at fine restaurants, and walked along the ocean, hand in hand like newlyweds. On their last night in the city, they stood on a pier watching the sun set over the Pacific. Caleb wrapped his arms around Sarah from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than dollars, for giving me a family and a home and a life better than anything I ever imagined." Sarah turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. There was silver in his dark hair now and lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But to her, he was still the handsome cowboy who had stopped to help a stranded woman on a dusty road. "You gave me all those things too," she said. "You saved me, Caleb. Not just that day with the wagon, but every day since. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. When they returned home, their children threw them a party, and half the territory seemed to show up. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Sarah danced with her husband, with her son, with old friends from town. She looked around at the crowd, at the ranch they had built, at the family they had created, and felt overwhelming gratitude. As the years continued to roll by, Sarah and Caleb grew older together, their love evolving but never diminishing. They became grandparents when Thomas and Anna had children, and then again when Emma married a lawyer from Prescott. Caleb taught his grandchildren to ride and rope, while Sarah taught them to sew and bake. They expanded their house one more time, adding a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. They had rocking chairs made, and they would sit there together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were dozens of people, 3 generations of the family that Sarah and Caleb had created. Looking around at all those faces, Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking about that broken wagon wheel," Sarah said. "About how one moment of bad luck turned into the greatest blessing of my life. If that wheel had not broken, if you had not come along that exact moment, none of this would exist." Caleb pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. You were meant for me, Sarah, and I was meant for you. Simple as that." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah leaned into her husband's embrace and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of their family, feeling the warmth of the Arizona sun on her face. She thought about the young woman she had been, terrified and alone on a deserted road with no idea what the future held. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped to help, who had fixed her wagon and asked her name twice because he wanted to hear it again. She thought about all the years in between, the joys and sorrows, the challenges and triumphs, all the small moments that had woven together to create a life richer than any tapestry she had ever sewn. Thomas raised a toast then, calling for everyone's attention. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Two people who taught us what love really means, who showed us that hard work and devotion can build something that lasts, who gave us a family and a home and an example we can only hope to live up to. Happy anniversary, Ma and Pa." "We love you." "Hear, hear." Everyone cheered, raising their glasses. Caleb stood and pulled Sarah to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "To my beautiful wife," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "who has made every day of the last 30 years an adventure. Who gave me everything I ever wanted and things I never knew I needed. I love you, Sarah Thornton. Today, tomorrow, and forever." He kissed her then, right there in front of everyone, and their family cheered and whistled. Sarah kissed him back, not caring who was watching, pouring 3 decades of love into that kiss. As the sun set on that perfect day, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah and Caleb sat together on their porch, watching their family celebrate. Young Margaret came and sat at their feet, leaning against her father's legs. Thomas and Anna were dancing with their children. The twins were laughing with friends. "It is a good life," Caleb said softly. "The best life," Sarah agreed. She thought about asking him if he remembered that day on the road, but she did not need to. She knew he remembered it as clearly as she did. It was the day their story began, the day fate or luck or divine providence had put them in the same place at the same time. It was the day a broken wagon wheel had led to a fixed heart. As darkness fell and the stars came out, one by one, Sarah rested her head on Caleb's shoulder and watched their family, their legacy, the living proof that love could grow from the smallest beginnings. She had been stranded and afraid, and he had stopped to help. Such a simple thing, really. A broken wheel. A cowboy with kind eyes and capable hands. A name asked twice because once was not enough. From such small moments, entire lives could bloom, and what a beautiful life it had been.